chase and keep the property values down.
America's Newest Cities is a public humanities project that seeks to increase awareness and dialogue in relation to the history of redlining and housing discrimination in California's Central Valley, specifically Kern County and Bakersfield, California. My name is Chris Livingston. I am the director of the Historical Research Center here at California State University, Bakersfield. I've been in charge of the research center for 12 years. I have total 16 years experience in archival management. Situated at the southern end of California's Central Valley, the Historical Research Center at California State University, Bakersfield preserves the region's history, especially as it relates to legal history, migration, indigenous cultures, music, and social justice issues. Self-identifying as a hands-on applied archive, the HRC brings together archivists, librarians, social scientists, and historians to instruct students and the community on the practical application of history and the preservation and conservation of historical information. As one of the few centers for historical research in California's Central Valley, the HRC has developed several research initiatives focusing on the history of redlining and housing discrimination. We have found that the resources that document this history are spread across institutions and government agencies across the region, making it difficult for students, educators, scholars, and community leaders to access. We do this through researching County Hall of Records. We're looking for very specific language in restrictive housing covenants on deeds. And what we found is that there's very specific racial language in these housing covenants. So we've taken that research and we've built a database via our webpage at hrc.csub.edu. And from that, we've built an exhibit here at CSUB that basically highlights the research and traces the history of redlining and housing discrimination here in the Bakersfield area. From that exhibit, we have created a public humanities lecture series where we've gone out into the community and to places such as Bakersfield College, the Kern County Museum, and even here on our own campus in campus classes, but also campus programming to bring this history to the public.
My name is Cruz. I am the processing archivist here at the Historical Research Center at California State University, Bakersfield. So America's Newest Cities originally started as my master's thesis and eventually a research project. The project's aim was to really look at the kind of segregated cityscape, right? To look at the development of the city and how race was really, a part of it. So as an expansion to the master's thesis, I got to speak more about education, policing, and other avenues that I didn't really focus on. Originally, I had really focused on housing inequality, specifically related to the practice of redlining and racially restricted covenants. My other focus was looking at the real estate practices in the Mayflower district, a primarily Black and Mexican neighborhood. So the value of the research, I think, is looking at how the city developed and how inequalities have changed over time. So redlining isn't really something that's static, right? Inequalities themselves have patterns, but they're not necessarily the same patterns that contribute to today's inequalities. So I think the value of it is to really look at the kind of changing inequalities over time. And second to that is to work with our community partners to really help them understand the inequalities we face today within a historical context.
I attended the event because as an urban planner, I believe that understanding the historical context of communities enhances our current work. It's crucial to engage with and experience the community firsthand. Being exposed to America's newest cities, housing, and redlining in California's Central Valley, it really reinforced the importance of researching our past to understand how we arrived at the present. This knowledge helps us plan comprehensively and avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, where redlining was a common practice in the past. It was evident in real estate, land use practices, physical barriers, in other discriminatory methods. While redlining was recognized and discussed in Los Angeles, the work that Chris and Donato and others in his team are doing is bringing the much needed attention to the issue here in Kern County.
Community interest on redlining and exclusionary housing practices has risen over the years in Bakersfield. On March 2nd, 2023, KGAT, a local news station, released a special report on California's reparations efforts.
In Kern County, African Americans experience displacement and segregation as well, particularly with being unable to live everywhere in Kern, like Taft. Taft is listed in the book Sundown Towns, A Hidden Dimension of American Racism by sociologist James W. Lowen. In addition, all white neighborhoods purposely exclude non-whites through discrimination with local laws, intimidation, and even violence. Or Oildale, a community notoriously known for its history towards African Americans, according to Histories by CSUB.
Bakersfield is, I think, unique on a lot of different levels. When I first got into doing research, I didn't see my own family's story represented in the existing historiographies, whether again it was stories of migration or farm labor or the Okie historiography. My own family came in the late 19th century. I think when we talk about what's unique about Bakersfield, historian Al Camarillo talks about racial borderhoods, and so this is his theory about the growth of communities of color on the periphery of cities. And so I love that concept because it got me thinking about Southeast Bakersfield and where my own family came from. And of course the research that y'all have done here at CSUB in unearthing an archival material for us to engage in as members of the public to almost complete in some ways an untold story in Bakersfield. Again, the fact that you're highlighting this for the public, it takes courage because some folks don't want to talk about it, but I think we can only go forward as a city if we know our history.
2023, the Bakersfield City Council had a discussion and a debate about the 2024 Bakersfield City Housing Elements inclusion of the history of discrimination. The housing element is developed and designed to support the city's housing efforts and local ordinances for the next 10 years. The report works with the city's general plan and vision.
I believe actually what happened 50 years ago does impact the community. We are living with many decisions that were made 50 years ago, and it's important to recognize that. And I don't see us recognizing some of the past ills of our community as a black eye. I think it's a recognition of some of those systemic issues that we have faced, especially many people in disadvantaged communities, many people who belong to historically minority communities. The term redlining, and I'm quoting this article, has become shorthand for many types of historic race-based exclusionary tactics in real estate, from racial steering by real estate agents, such as directing black home buyers and renters to certain neighborhoods or buildings and away from others, to racial covenants in many suburbs and developments, barring black residents from buying homes. This has been policy that was established and instituted by cities, by communities, all of which contributed to the racial segregation that shaped the way America looks today.
I don't think any one of us were the ones who are, making these decisions in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, but we are the ones who are representing the families who are dealing with the repercussions today, right? And it's important that we continue to acknowledge that history because it is going to allow for us to make a more equitable and safe and better Bakersfield. So there are there's a history of racial covenant restrictions, where certain tract maps that were made years ago that specifically restricted different types of races and folks of different types of backgrounds from purchasing a home and residing in particular parts of our community. So I just want to read one really quickly into the record. This comes from the Oleander community. I won't name what the property is or which family owned it at the time, but if you scroll down, and I can share this with the entire council, there is a certain section, subsection F, that says, no persons of any race other than the white or Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic servants of different race domiciled with an owner or tenant. That is the type of language that has led us to this moment, and that is the type of language that we must continue to acknowledge.
Dr. Albert Camarillo is the Leon Sloss Jr. Memorial Professor, Emeritus Department of History at Stanford University. Camarillo served as an expert witness in the support of the plaintiffs in the recent precedent-setting U.S. District Court case Luna versus the Kern County Board of Supervisors. Camarillo provided historical and contemporary perspectives on why this federal voting rights case was so important for the growing Latino, Latinx population in Kern County and in California.
The historical context, again, if we go back to Jaime Crow, it's going to seep into so many places. It seeps into housing discrimination, right? 1928, the first survey of race and housing in the state of California is conducted by some researchers. This is from the city of Bakersfield, so here we are. Edward Kelly, who was the president of the Realty Board at that time in 1928, and the survey question asked, are there segregated sections in your locality based on the color line? They actually used the color line. Kelly says, yes, Negroes, Chinese, Japanese, Mexicans, and any others not of the white or Caucasian race. No local ordinance, he said. Residential segregation was enforced through subdivision restrictions, real estate race-related restrictions, which become ubiquitous by the 1920s, and custom only. Customary practice, no law, right, no law, but customary practice and deed restrictions. Survey question, in your judgment, how can this important problem be handled by real estate interests? Mr. Kelly says, for the realtor to be sincere and not sell to the Chinese, the Japanese, Negroes, and Mexicans unless it is in their section of the locality and where they should be. And in Bakersfield, it was southeast Bakersfield, outside the city limits where African Americans and Mexicans and the few Chinese and Japanese were allowed to live. Jaime Crow.
So there's two specific anecdotes I would share on student impact. We have one of our programs was to present to Kern High School District educators, and through that developed one teacher in the Kern High School District developed an assignment in their class, and one of their students in there focused on housing discrimination and redlining here in Kern County, and used our research to incorporate into their paper, and then eventually presented that paper at a conference we had here on campus for dual enrollment high school students. So that was a very excellent presentation, and you could see how impactful this research has been on that particular student. We also had a senior student in their senior thesis, their senior seminar paper, use our research extensively.
Hi, my name is Samuel Toro. I recently graduated from California State University, Bakersfield with a public history degree, and I am now I'm going to be a master's student in the graduate program here. As a part of my senior seminar project, I was tasked to research anything in the 1960s, and I chose to keep it closer to home here in Bakersfield. As a student assistant in the archives, I was also tasked with going through a bunch of covenant tracts and I used a lot of that in my research, and it was interesting to see the words and the language you use. I went through the covenants and specifically looked for racially restricted covenants, like keywords such as only accessible to the white Caucasian race, or at one point they would even say that that people of color can access these homes if they are servants to the people of the white owners.
Part of the project isn't necessarily interpreting or even making the history public, but also making the resources public, right? So it's a combination of context and primary source materials. And I think that's the real importance, to pass on the research, not necessarily hold it for ourselves or hold it for the institution, but to make it publicly available for others to interpret and carry the research forward. So the importance of giving historical research to the public and to researchers, I think, is something that, as an institution, we have to kind of lead on, right? So creating research for the public within a historical context, and really the value is to not just to make them available, but also increase the understanding, right? And I think goes to kind of my understanding of it through my history master's and through the understanding of secondary historical material is, what do you base your interpretation on, right? So I think if we kind of supplement or even facilitate that understanding of the historical context in inequalities, I think it allows the primary source materials to be that much stronger, right? So I think in that sense, that is one of our missions here at the Historical Research Center, is not just to have archival primary source materials, but also to have the interpretation or even the facilitation of an interpretation of historic materials to the public and to the wider research community.
I think for young people, for researchers, new professors, graduate students, anyone studying, especially Western history, archives can be a challenge. I had to travel all across America to research the history of Bakersfield. I spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., in Detroit, at Stanford, in LA, because the record collection is often buried in people's homes, in people's garages, or in the memories of grandparents or uncles and aunts. So for young people pursuing this research, I think knowing oral history, I think as a go-to method is extremely helpful, because the stories that your grandparents or your parents know serve as a basis for then doing more archival research, or how to go into a city directory and figure out what kind of jobs did people have in a particular area, or what were the neighbors like. So again, doing oral history, I think, is very complementary to a project like this. And again, it will unearth the kinds of questions that you can then take to archivists who maybe they have collections that are relevant to whatever city or place that you're studying. But again, an archive is not neutral. You have to know how to talk to an archivist. So I would just say have confidence in your families, your neighborhoods, your churches, your associations, that they might have really rich archival records that are not tapped, that are not preserved. And I would encourage you to have courage and to be without fear in talking to those folks, because you're committed to telling the story of the past. You're committed to building archives. And that can be a sensitive area, but somebody has to do that work, or those stories will absolutely be forgotten. With the work that I do, what keeps me going is my grandmother. I think she had a 5th grade education. She basically raised me, and she passed away several years ago, but I have a little picture on my desk of her as a migrant immigrant coming to Bakersfield like in 1921. And I think about how far my own family has come in American institutions. And finally, every time I teach Mexican American history, I talk about my grandmother to my students. And I'm doing something to her legacy, because she couldn't succeed in schools for a variety of reasons, some institutional, some familiar, some poverty, but then students can connect with it, right? So I would encourage young people and students doing this research to find the stories that aren't being told, find the stories in your family that that maybe people want to talk about, maybe they don't want to talk about, and ask those questions, and then try to build those archives. You'll appreciate it not only for yourself and your family, but you're just going to be contributing to the preservation of your community, I think.